Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, All-Star voting has come to an end. Do the Bucks have two All-Stars? Do they deserve two? We'll get into that conversation. Preview a matchup with the New Orleans Pelicans as we get set for another showdown, a back-to-back this week as well. All of that comes your way next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not yet, you can subscribe for free at lockedondaily.com and get your day started with the all-new and free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Again, lockedondaily.com to get started. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. We'll get to looking ahead to this matchup with the Pelicans in just a moment, but Camille, since we last spoke, All-Star voting has come to an end, and Giannis is going to be an All-Star at last check through the third returns. He was the leading vote getter. This would be a second consecutive season of that. But Damian Lillard was, I think it was like 13,000 votes away from cracking the top two in the backcourt. The fact that he's that close, and I get Dame and his gravity, as we talk about quite a bit, but with the season the Cleveland Cavaliers have been having, that it's that close between Dame and Donovan Mitchell, I think was very surprising to me and others. I don't think he's going to catch Donovan Mitchell when we get the final returns coming through here in the fan vote. But is he an All-Star this year? Like, obviously, if that's the case, he's not a starter. But if he's not a starter, it's a pretty tough case. Do you think he makes it?
I think that he has a case to make it. So whenever I'm trying to think about All-Star and like All-Star cases, the first thing I normally try to do is figure out who I think is going to start. And as you said, I don't think that Dame makes it, although you mentioned how it was interesting how close he was to Donovan Mitchell. Yeah. I was surprised with the New York fan base, the Knicks fan base, that Brunson was below Dame as well. And I think that even though LaMelo has been leading in the fan vote for the Eastern Conference guards, I think the starters end up being Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Brunson once that player and media vote kind of comes in for it. So I'm thinking those two guys will probably start. I don't think LaMelo makes it at all this year just because of how the Hornets are doing. I can't see coaches voting for him. So then it's like when you're thinking of guard, you have Damian Lillard, you would have Trae Young, you would have Cade Cunningham. And I think that when you look at those three additional guards, all three have a really strong case. So it's like, do you think that Dame has played strong enough for him to be an actual backcourt or a reserve backcourt guy, or is he a wild card now? And for Dame, I think that he can get in, if not as one of those, reserve backcourt guys, I think he can get in as a wild card. Because when you're looking at the forwards as well, who he's competing with, then, you have the starters who are probably Giannis, Tatum, Karl-Anthony Towns. And then you have, like, Paolo was high in the fan vote, but I think he's missed too many games to be an All-Star this year. Jaylen Brown, Evan Mobley. I think Franz has missed too much time. Embiid has missed too much time. Jimmy Butler. I think there's just too much going on around Jimmy Butler. So I think Dame has a way into the game this year, thanks on the back of the coaches.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned it, but what would we call it? The process. It's 50% fan vote, 25% player vote, 25% coaches vote. You don't think LaMelo's going to get the coaches vote, especially for his own coach who's already benched him late in the game a couple of times? So Dame's numbers have been much better this season. The efficiency has been there. He's shooting 39% on threes, which I think we all kind of sweep under the rug, and it may not feel like it. A lot of it has started to come on of late, but another season where he's got a high assist total and an assist rate as well. His scoring is up from last year and right in line with what his career average is at 25 points per game. I think the bigger challenge for Dame this year, and everything you brought up I don't disagree with, like, in a vacuum, but I think the challenge that he's going to be up against this year is, as we look through the rosters,
Mhm.
I mean, the Cavs are not going to have two starters. The Cavs may only have one All-Star. I think Evan Mobley is going to get in there, and it's hard to shut a team out to not give them multiple All-Stars when they're doing that, but they're going to have one starter. Celtics are going to have one starter in Jason Tatum. I don't know if Jaylen Brown makes it this year. That you just go up and down. The Knicks, they'll get two players, but are the Bucks at that level? And after the 2-8 start and all the noise that was surrounding that, I just have and I think his path is starting. I think it's going to be challenging for numbers we'll get into in a second. And I have a hard time seeing the Bucks get rewarded after all of the attention that was on the 2-8 start and everything else, and the way the Cavs have played, the way some other teams have played too, that are really going to impact Dame's candidacy. I think his only shot at being an All-Star this year is by if he passed Donovan Mitchell and if he gets those votes from coaches and his peers and becomes a starter here in this All-Star game, because, you know, you went through some of the names of the wild card. But if we just look at guys that are on the fringe, you mentioned LaMelo Ball, Tyrese Maxey has played well this year, but by the numbers, Dame has had a better season than Tyrese Maxey, but still, he's basically been alone this year, and Dame has had Giannis there with him. Jalen Brunson, you mentioned, who wasn't in the starting mix with that first return of votes. Cade Cunningham is going to be
he's an All-Star.
Deserves to be an All-Star. Tyler Hero, I think, is in that mix as well. So you just start to see more and more of these names. I mean, Trae Young, you may not like his game, but he's averaging 12 assists per game, and the Hawks have been a pretty good team so far this season. So I don't think he makes it ultimately. I think he's deserving to be an All-Star this year. I think the issue that he's up against is there are just as many deserving players that are out there and more stories to reward.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how the vote goes. Trae Young is somebody who historically has not seemed to be voted well with his peers in the media. So that might go in Dame's favor as well. And even though the Bucks got off to that really slow start, I think with where voting is taking place, like at this point in the season, you look at the standings and it's like, okay, the Cavs, they're the 1 seed. I don't think anyone's catching the Cavs at this point. 1 seed, probably 2 All-Stars. Celtics, probably 2 All-Stars in the 2 seed. Knicks, probably 2 All-Stars in the 3 seed. The Bucks are holding on to that 4 seed right now. So even though they had that 2-8 start, one could look at the record, see where they are in the standings and be like, okay, you know, they're a game behind the Knicks in the loss column. Why are they in the 4th spot after that slow start? Because of what Dame and what Giannis were doing. So I think that coaches, especially how much respect coaches tend to have for Damian Lillard, the respect that he has amongst his peers as well, could help. But it is going to come down, I think, to seeing just how they vote, because there are some deserving guards out there, as you mentioned. I didn't even mention Darius Garland. Like, I don't think that Cleveland gets 3, but Garland has been hooping. He's been one of the best players in the clutch as well this season. So I could see some guys looking to give him some votes. It'll be really interesting to see how it shakes out. But I think that Dame's stature, his reputation, and numbers that he's been putting up this year, I think that gets him into it. But I'll be really curious to know what all the listeners think and all the everydayers think as well. So make sure y'all let us know in the comments if you think Dame makes the All-Star team.
And it's just 12 players too. It's not your 15-player roster. I think I may have said coach's vote, as you pointed it out too. It's player vote and then media vote make up the other 50% of it. But just trying in my head to formulate a list of names. There's some interesting pieces that you mentioned, some of the injuries. I think that hurts Paolo Banchero, who, you know, if he started the way he did the first 6 games and carried that through, and even since his return, Paolo's probably an All-Star. Franz Wagner would have made it interesting without that injury as well. Evan Mobley is going to be an All-Star. I think the potential for snubs, it's probably Trae Young, LaMelo Ball, and Dame. There's one spot for those 3 guys, right? And, you know, even guys like Cam Thomas. This isn't baseball where every team has to have an All-Star, and he's started to fall off as well. I think it's going to be almost impossible to hold Tyler Hero and Cade Cunningham off the list with what they've done with those teams, and their numbers are very comparable to Damian Lillard. So it's going to be interesting as we start to see in the coming days here what the vote reveals for players and our fans, I should say, in terms of our starters. And then from there, what the reserves are. This year more than ever, a very, very interesting spot for the Bucks and Damian Lillard to see if they have multiple All-Star representatives coming up here in February. I do want to pivot, though, because we've talked quite a bit about the improved defense for the Bucks, where that currently sits. But it's always come with the notion of, okay, now the offense has to get there. So it got me to thinking, we talk so much about you have to be a top 10 defense. You have to be here to win a championship. But what about the offense? What have we seen historically here? And there's a couple of interesting teams in the past that have won an NBA championship with an offense that you wouldn't have anticipated. So we'll get into that conversation coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. I love going to live events, sports, music, theater, comedy, wrestling events. Some of my favorite memories in the last year were attending those types of events. Seeing the St. Louis Blues come to Milwaukee and play at Fiserv Forum, going to WWE SmackDown, you name it. Game Time is the way that I get to get that feel of excitement with those unforgettable moments. And now they made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I was looking for tickets recently, as I said, to see a couple of those events, and I used Game Time. Didn't need all of the features that I get because these events were inside a Fiserv Forum, which I'm well familiar with, but if you're not in the same boat as me, you can see the panoramic view from your seats. You can find the best deal. You get the best ticket backing guaranteed in the industry as well. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. So the offense, it's still hard to believe, and we touched on this yesterday, some of the comments that we saw trickle in from that show too, the question that we posed of, hey, what surprises you more?
Yeah.
The fact that this Bucks defense has been very good, excellent all season long, or the fact that we're still talking about, can this offense consistently stay in the top half and crack the top 10? So it got me to wondering that, I think we both feel this way, pretty confident this defense is what we've seen. Like it's not a blip. It's not a mirage. It's not just, well, they had a soft schedule and this is what we're seeing here. It's 41 games now that this defense has done this. So how do we get the offense to the levels it needs to be at? We've covered that countless times on the show with the chemistry that you're developing, the shooters, guys back, tinkering with lineups, all of it. But where does the offense need to be for the Bucks to ultimately reach the heights that they are shooting for? So it got me to thinking about, all right, historically, what have we seen from championship teams, from those title-winning teams? Because as I mentioned, everybody, Camille, will point out to you, you got to have a top 10 defense to win an NBA championship, which mostly true. The Denver Nuggets, kind of toyed with that a little bit. But what doesn't get talked about a lot is you have to be there offensively as well. Like you need to be in the top 10 in offense, defense, and net rating. So going back through the years and looking at our most recent championship teams here, last year, come as no surprise to anyone, I should assume, that the Boston Celtics were the number one offense in the league. They also had the number 2 defense. The year prior to that, the Denver Nuggets won the championship, and we mentioned they were the team that kind of played hard and fast with the rules, 15th in defense. Do you know where they finished offensively?
I'm going to guess like 6th?
5th. 5th best defense, and not too far behind the Knicks, Celtics, and Sixers for potentially being the second best offense in the league. The year prior to that is where it starts to get interesting. That was the resurgent Golden State Warriors team.
Yeah.
They had the number 2 defense in the league, and they won the championship with the number 16 offense.
That has to be the worst offensive rating of any recent champion.
Yeah, I mean, It's, I suppose, by the numbers, middle of the pack, but worse than league average with the 16th offense. And again, just as the conversations we're having here about the Bucks with how could this be with Damian Lillard and Giannis? That is a team that won a championship with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, and they were still the 16th rated offense. The year prior to that, when the Bucks won the championship, the Bucks had the 9th best defense, but the 5th best offense in the league. And that brings us to one of the other, I suppose you could say, outlier years here. It was certainly a strange year, not just in the league, but in the world. And that's the 2019-20 season, which wrapped up in the bubble at Disney World. And the Lakers won the championship that year, of course, with the 3rd best defense and the 11th best offense. So as you just go through here in the last decade, and once we go further than that, you get to the point where it was, the Cavs and the Warriors routinely playing for a championship and right up there in that mix. So you got to go back a ways to start to look at any other potential outliers. But what stands out are those 2 years that, for the most part, it's not even a top 10. It's top 5 offenses are winning the championship with a defense that's still very good. And then you had those 2 years where you had teams right around. I mean, the Bucks are splitting the difference between where the Lakers were and the Warriors were offensively, with a defense that, it's not in the top 5, but it has consistently been in the top 10.
It's so interesting hearing that and thinking about what those teams were and how could it have worked for them if that was the offensive rating that they had throughout the season. How good was the offense? When you think about that Warriors team, as you mentioned, having Steph Curry and Klay Thompson helps in clutch situations and just down the stretch to have a superstar you can lean on if the rest of your offense is stalling. And thinking about like that Lakers team, I mean, the bubble, it's going back to those bubble years. It's weird. It was a different type of basketball during those years, but it's also funny to me that we're having this conversation. And last year we were doing the research into like, well, if you have like a top 5 offense, how far back can your defense be to really win a championship? And then you point to that Denver team. But I think that the thing with that is also something I'll be looking for with this Bucks team. And with that Denver team that won the championship a few years ago, they finished 15th defensively. But if you had looked at their numbers like after All-Star break, I think it was after All-Star, like January 1st, they were a top 10 defense going forward. So for this Bucks team this season that's been hovering at this point, like around that 10 mark, if they can be, a more consistent offense after All-Star break, from whatever date going forward, for a stretch of time to give me enough confidence heading into the playoffs, like, hey, they have figured this out. I have a lot more confidence in that championship ability. But I mean, having Giannis, having Dame, of course, that helps. I just think that for the Bucks, part of the challenge is that the 3 teams ahead of you in the East, Cleveland, Boston, New York, those are the top 3 offenses in the entire league. So you have to make sure you're going to be able to keep up. And of course, you got to be able to make sure you can stop guys. But knowing that those teams ahead of you have some offenses that are really firing on all cylinders, it shows you where you want to try to be when you're heading into that playoff run come April.
The only other ones that are in that neighborhood, the year that the Mavericks won the finals and beat the Miami Heat in that first run of the Heatles, they were 9th, and in the 2010 finals when the Lakers won, they were 11th. So you got to start to consistently go back a ways. That, I mean, here we're already back 15 seasons basically, and we're talking about 4 teams that were outside of, basically the top 5 in terms of their offenses and went on to win a championship. So it has happened. It can be done. But I think the bigger point here is what we touched on earlier in the show, and that's what the Bucks have a chance to do, and that's finding the right mix where you're in the top 10 in all 3 of those areas. They can still very easily get into the top 10 offensively this season. As I said, I think you feel the same way as well. I expect them to stay in the top 10 defensively. If they drop out of it, I don't really expect them to drop any further than 12th based on what they've shown us so far and how this team has played. So they can very well get there. The big thing is, if you're not going to be elite at one of those 2, then you have to just be really good at the other two. So what, somewhere in that 5 to 8 range that you finish in both of those areas. You got to be elite at one of them and, good at the other, or just be consistently good at both of them. And that's, going on 20 years now is what's been the recipe for success for all these championship teams.
And consistency, that's the word that we keep coming back to with this Bucks team of what we've been wanting to see more of. Like this homestand that they just had, 4-0, that's a really great start after what happened in New York for this team to bounce back. But they're going to have to consistently show that they can come out there and compete and execute at a high level. And to your point about them just finishing top 10, like it's still within the realm possibility that they can get into the top 10, not just looking at it.
12th in offense right now.
Right. Not just looking at it from a certain date going forward. Like, hey, can you be top 10 from January 1st going forward? Can you be top 10 from whatever date you want to pick? Like on the whole of a season, they're hovering right outside of that range. So they can still crack that top 10 offense, top 10 defense by the end of the year without looking at any stretches. But I'd feel a lot more encouraged if we can get a stretch here consistently where you see them operating and firing on a really high level, a top 5 offense or defense for a consistent period of time. Even if the full season rank doesn't represent that, I need to see that heading into the playoffs for an extended stretch to really, really feel good about what they can bring to the table.
We kind of danced around the numbers in their current rankings. So we'll show you where they are now for the season as a whole. And I suppose where they've been since the 2-8 start, since it's much better. But again, there's been a lot of consistency on the defensive end. So we'll update you on those numbers and take a look at an interesting matchup. I got a little bit of pushback from a regular listener of the show within the Bucks organization who said, are you sure you want to say this is a must-win game? Because New Orleans had some injuries. They're starting to get healthy. They're starting to play better. I don't know if I'm willing to go there. So we'll take a look at today's matchup, I should say, against the Pelicans, coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. So again, season as a whole, 41 games. The Bucks are 12th in offense, 8th in defense, and 11th in net rating. If we just look at the last 31 games, so taking the 2-8 start out of the mix, the Bucks are 22-9, which is the 4th best record in the league since that time. And they are 9th in offense, 5th in defense, and 8th in net rating. So they've been right there where we said they needed to be in the games played since then. So just keep that rolling and carry it through for the end of the season. So I mentioned there's a little bit of pushback of,
I got to hear this one.
You sure you're going to say this is a must-win game against the New Orleans Pelicans? I still say yes, and I still stand by it because, look, I get they're getting healthier. They're getting some guys back, although Zion Williamson just missed their game. One of the huge comeback win that the Pelicans had, by the way, a very strange game. Zion Williamson missed that game, and I'm doing the old veteran move here of trying to really stall it out as I can look this up, Camille, with a non-COVID illness. So I'm curious what that means for his status for this game, because the Pelicans have not submitted their injury report yet, but AJ Green remains out with that quad strain. Chris Middleton is probable. So I don't know what that means for the game Thursday in Miami. And if we've moved past, okay, we think Chris can play in back-to-backs. Giannis is also probable. But we don't know what the status is for Zion and the rest of the Pelicans yet, as they've yet to submit that injury report at the time of this recording. I still say yes. I think it's a must-win because of the games that you have left after New Orleans. It's not very easy, right? You don't have the high volume of games, I should say, against the teams like the Wizards and the Hornets and other teams, the Nets that maybe the Nets isn't a good example, but those types of teams that you've beaten up on, you don't have very many of those left. So you have to start to look up and down the list and say, okay, well, this team we're going to be favored against, this team we feel like we're better than, we got to win this game.
Yeah, I get why you come at it from that angle of like it's a must-win game, especially after what the Bucks have been building here over the last week and a half or so. But the thing with the Pelicans that is so that makes this game it's not a trap game in my opinion, but it's one of those games that I think could be a little bit more difficult than people would assume based on records alone. This is the Pelicans team where since the beginning of the year, they're 7-4. So they have been winning a few more games. I am happy that they figured out a way to come back against the Utah Jazz on Monday night because I was like, teams, when they have something to prove too, like they might have a little bit of an emotional hangover coming to that game against the Bucks after coming back from being down 25 to a tanking Jazz team that even sat Colin Sexton for rest, even though this was a team that came off of 2 days of rest.
Bryce Sensabaugh played 24 minutes.
And it took
Kyle
everything.
Filipowski played nearly 40 minutes in this game.
Weird, like they had like nobody on the Jazz side, and they came out. And
Luke scored 19 points and played almost 30 minutes.
And they almost won, Justin. They almost won against a Pelicans team that still has CJ out there. They had DeJounte Murray out there. So like they're getting some guys back, like you mentioned, not fully healthy, but they have some guys out there, Trae Murphy, Jose Alvarado, some key people in their rotation. And this Pelicans team, since the year started, as I mentioned, they've been playing a bit better. 12th best offense in the league since that time, 17th best defense. So like, yes, they'll propose some type of a challenge, and it's in New Orleans, even though, they're not selling out the place like they did during those playoff runs here in the last.
Well, they're certainly not going to sell it out later today because people are not going to be able to get
and not in this
to the arena with the snow that New Orleans just got dumped on.
So for the Bucks, it's a game where it's like, if you can get this one on the first game of back-to-back before you come back home, like it's an important game. I wouldn't go as far as saying a must win, but I think it's important to get it.
Now you're really making me reconsider all of this, Camille. So they have had a 6-game losing streak, a 9-game losing streak, and an 11-game losing streak so far this season. You mentioned they are playing much better. They have gone 7-3 in their last 10 games. I don't even want to shame you for your wins because you could very easily do that to the Bucks and say, well, yeah, they're starting to turn around, but look at this schedule. I mean, we could gently nudge back with the Magic have played well in every game but one that the Bucks played them in, and they beat them in all those. The Rockets was a nice win. I know it doesn't count, but trust me, it's on there. It did happen. The Bucks dominated the Oklahoma City Thunder. They played competitive against other teams. But in that 7-3 record, I just said I don't want to shame them, but I'm going to do it anyway. That 7-3 record, 2 wins against the Wizards, 1 win against the Sixers when I believe no one was playing. They beat the Bulls, who have currently, I believe that started the Bulls' 5-game losing streak. They beat the Mavs without Kyrie and without Luka, and they beat the Utah Jazz twice by a total of 17 points in those 2 games. They lost to the Celtics by a point. I'll grant you that. But blown out by the Timberwolves, blown out by the Portland Trailblazers. So it's a team that when they're healthy, they can, play with just about anybody. When you look at the makeup of the roster with the defense that they have and the two-way players certainly on the wing, that's what the challenge is. And of course, having Zion Williamson on the floor, but Zion missing the game with a non-COVID illness on Monday night. I don't know about that. I'm going to be very curious to see the injury report when they do, in fact, update it. Because as we've experienced, Camille, you miss the game with an illness. It's usually not one game that you're missing.
Yeah. And teams don't want to take the chance that you come back too soon and you get other guys sick. And
you spread it to the team. Yeah.
Right. But let me ask you this, Justin. If Zion does play, like, does the roster that the Pelicans put out on the court change your opinion on how big of a must-win game this is for the Bucks? Or is it like you're thinking like they're still going to be kind of wounded when it comes to who's able to hit the court, so you expect the Bucks to take care of business in that sense?
I still expect the Bucks to take care of business. I mean, the Pelicans record is what it is. And look, of the 26 of their losses have come on 3 separate losing streaks of at least 6 games. So that's a big part of it. But I don't know. I don't know that it's necessarily just the injuries for this Pelicans team. And look, one name that we did not mention is Brandon Ingram, who's only played in 18 games so far this season for the Pelicans. But it just seems like it was like that in the blink of an eye. It went from a team of, okay, this is interesting. I wonder what they're going to do with Brandon Ingram. You can build around Zion. You got all these nice pieces. Granted, nobody was saying that about Dyson Daniels. And it turns out he was probably the best player in that trade. But when you look at Trae Murphy and Herb Jones, there are all these pieces that you really liked. Jose Alvarado as well. And it just hasn't translated. I mean, one area too that I would expect the Bucks to hold a major advantage is where the Bucks have been dominating of late, and that is around the rim and in the paint, because it's a New Orleans team where your big is Daniel Tice. And you go back to the offseason when we all kind of said they're going to make some type of move, right? They're not just rolling with this group. And, as we've seen, no, this is the group that they're rolling with. They do a decent job, I should say, at really limiting opponents' production at the around the rim here. They're good at defending it, or excuse me, they're good at the volume of attempts they give up. The problem is, as we mentioned, it's basically just Daniel Tice. So when you get there, you're scoring. They're 29th right now in opponent efficiency at the rim.
And one thing that sometimes injuries can reveal is just other guys giving guys more time to play, and their rookie center, Masai.
Yeah.
Like he's been all right. He's been doing all right. And I'm not saying that in the sense of like, yeah, he's, going to be a complete game changer for him in this game against the Bucks if he's healthy, because he also missed the game on Monday against the Jazz. So they don't have the injury report out. Not sure how much depth they're going to have in their front court against the Bucks. And we've seen, as you pointed out, the Bucks take advantage of their size when they have that mismatch. And that's something I expect for this Bucks team to do. Even if Masai is playing, like Brook Lopez, Giannis, they should be able to, I don't want to say Giannis can have his way with almost anybody in the league. But there should be a size advantage that the Bucks can lean on there. And then when you're thinking about perimeter defenders, as well as like who's going to check Dame, how are they going to try to play that? They got some guys over there that can, stay one-on-one with Dame, but I don't know if they have enough firepower defensively to keep up with the Bucks as a whole, especially if the Bucks are able to generate good looks and, get those shots that we've seen them capitalize on over the last month or so.
Split the season series last year too, did these two teams here. So the Bucks won at home and they lost in New Orleans. I'm very curious to see the Bucks approach to this game and how they get up for it, because again, you can say the Pelicans are not in that group right now. They have the fourth worst record in the league. I would certainly entertain, are the Pelicans a bottom 5 team? Probably not, by the talent that they've assembled on the roster. The injuries are a big part of it, but are they a bottom 10 team? Maybe. And again, you have so few of those games left now, especially in 2 weeks, Camille, when we get to February. 32 of the Bucks' final 35 games are going to be played against teams that are currently in the playoffs, or teams like the Phoenix Suns that we expect to be playoff teams. And who knows, we may make some moves at the deadline or leading up to the deadline to make sure that we get to that place. And actually, Phoenix is in the playoffs as we speak. The Warriors are the team that they leapfrogged, but you still got 2 games against the Warriors. So that's the type of opponents that the Bucks have left on the schedule from here on out. We'll know a lot more when we see that injury report momentarily here as the Pelicans begin to update it, and we get a better idea of what the Bucks are going to be going up against later on tonight in New Orleans. That is going to do it for today's show, though, and I suppose leave your thoughts. Is this a must-win game? Are we overvaluing it? And we'll address those, but we got 2 more shows coming up this week, both post-game shows with a back-to-back. So we'll recap this Pelicans game on tomorrow's show. And then, of course, the rivalry game, Camille, between the Bucks and the Miami Heat is part of Rivals Week.
Such a big rivalry at this point. Again, doesn't feel the same. Well, Jimmy probably is going to play in this one.
I would assume he's going to play.
The feeling's back.
I wonder, did we get Jimmy Butler showing up doing media wearing like a Glenn Robinson jersey and just doing anything he can?
I will be so annoyed.
Or wearing his Jimmy Butler Marquette jersey.
So annoyed if he goes that route. Like, don't add flame to this fire, Jimmy. I'm not. I don't want it. I don't want it, Justin.
He's wearing a Jay Crowder jersey to just check off both boxes.
Man, I know you got some more second round picks somewhere.
That'll do it for today's show, though, as we got the 2 games coming up this week, and we of course have the recap. So leave your thoughts on the Pelicans, where they stand currently in the NBA. Is this a must-win game for the Bucks? For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.